So for those of you who are joining and aren't panelists, we're going to be turning on your video and your sound simply just so we can make sure that the folks, the panelists who are speaking, that they are easier for everybody to see. So you don't have to search through a whole bunch of screens. But thanks everybody for joining, and I think we will get started. So Karen, Heidi, Tina, Andrew, thank you so much for joining me today. It's great to see you all virtually. This is as much as I get to see people outside my family these days. So it's great to see you. My name is Brooke Learman. I'm a state delegate for District 46, and I represent with my teammates, Senator Bill Ferguson and delegates Luke Clippinger and Robin Lewis, proud to represent the Fight in 46 in Baltimore City and to do work with colleagues, some of whom are on the line today, around the state of Maryland. And the issue that we're going to be talking about today really is a statewide issue, even though we are going to be talking about the Baltimore side of it more than any other side. And, you know, I really believe that being an elected official and being a state delegate is about more than just passing legislation in Annapolis. I think it's about making sure that we're really working to reduce barriers to success and to create opportunities for all. And this issue really gets to the heart of that. You know, we know that people were facing huge challenges before this pandemic and economic collapse, and we know that they're facing those challenges now in new, unexpected, and really scary ways. So today, we find ourselves in Maryland with 41,546 confirmed cases of coronavirus. We've lost nearly 2,000 Marylanders. We have nearly 1,500 still in the hospital. Unfortunately, the governor decided to leave it up to each jurisdiction, whether they would continue their stay order or move to the safer at home advisory. Here in Baltimore City and our surrounding jurisdictions, we are making sure that we are putting the health and safety of our residents first and foremost, because we know that a strong recovery can only happen when there is, when people feel healthy and they're safe. And so we are still under a stay-at-home order. So why are we talking about the digital divide today? Well, I think it became immediately apparent the minute that Karen Salmon, our school superintendent, said schools would be closed, that online learning was going to have to start. But it also became apparent when people started closing down businesses, and we realized that people were going to have to, who could work from home, were going to have to. You know, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we have the luxury right now of being at home, right? Like I'm in my kids' playroom with my computer set up and have the luxury of being here, but only because our frontline workers, our nurses and our doctors, our transit drivers, our grocery store workers, our farm workers are really out doing work on the front lines. And, you know, but those of us who are working from home or have jobs who have the option to do that, we're also completely dependent on the internet. And so if it wasn't apparent before that internet really needs to be a public right, and that it's just as important as electricity in today's economy and succeeding in today's world, it is very apparent, I think, to everybody now just how true that is. So just this month, the ABLE Foundation released a report on the digital divide, and it has some pretty jarring statistics. I'll give a shout out to the ABLE Foundation for their report. That, you know, and indicating that really large numbers of Baltimore households lack two essential tools for getting online, right? Wireless broadband service at home and access to a computer. So these are two issues. And as services increasingly move online, this lack of access affects a growing number of essential activities, from homework to job searches to benefit applications. And for many low-income households and communities of color, the lack of internet or a computer is compounding gaps in educational attainment, and the achievement gap is growing, and of course for financial security. So we've taken some actions at the state level on a statewide look, but we haven't yet really focused on the sort of urban and Baltimore City divide. And so I'm thrilled today to have some of the experts on this issue joining me to talk about this and to talk with all of you and answer some questions. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over. We're going to start with Andrew Coy. Andrew is the founder and executive director of the Digital Harbor Foundation, a fantastic organization doing an important work in District 46 and Federal Hill, but really working with communities all over the city in Central Maryland and educating kids and doing great work. He also worked in the Obama White House for a while, leading their Makerspace initiative. So Andrew, I'm gonna kick it over to you to start things off, and then we're gonna move on from there. I should add, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box and we'll move through to them at the end. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Brooke, and for the introduction and the opportunity to speak briefly about this. You know, I do think all of us that are here, obviously, you know, it speaks to the fact that we do have the ability to connect. And if you haven't thought about what it would be like to not be connected, that is a sign that you are connected, right? And that you should probably stop for a minute and imagine what a day in the life would be like if you didn't have those connection points, and if you didn't have the ability, and just how complicated life would be, from things like applying for unemployment insurance, right? Which, you know, too many state systems are not even mobile optimized or allow for that, to, you know, to distance learning and to navigating all these different pieces, right? It's been said that being poor is really expensive. And I'll tell you that the navigating all of those systems without the ability to access resources online is part of what is expensive about that. You know, one of the things I wanted to share here briefly to help frame a little bit of the conversation, you know, is some of the data that we can look at and view. I just wanted to say that the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance by the Jacob France Institute, Seema Iyer and the team there have done a fantastic job organizing and pulling lots of data together. The ABLE report is a fantastic update to some of those things. But you can actually go and look at some of the indicator signs by area, by a vital indicator, and internet access is one of those. And my team and I, we've done this where we've gone through and looked and have created a composite score of the community statistical areas. So the team at BNIA has divided up Baltimore into 54 neighborhoods or community statistical areas comprised of multiple smaller neighborhoods. And you can see here all the different neighborhoods listed out. And with these different pieces of information about population, household without internet by both number and percentage, household earning less than 25,000 and under 18, you can start to see how the access is across the city. And some of the neighborhoods are looking at, you know, 38% of households not having internet access, while others are down below 10%. You know, the citywide average is somewhere in the vicinity of 22.5%. And so as you look at some of these things, we've built out this ability to say, if you wanted to address the issue for 7 neighborhoods, what 7 neighborhoods would be those that would, you know, make sense from addressing where the need is the greatest to look at. We've also, you know, so you can explore some of this data, which is open data that's on the BNIA website as well. We've also built out this little tool using Esri as a backend to be able to visualize this. And the first thing that you're going to notice right when you're looking at this this map is it is the black butterfly and white L, right? This is the same issues that have faced Baltimore from racial and equity lenses have been cutting the lines of digital divide and access. And you know, there's so many you know, sort of neighborhoods and communities that need and would benefit from, but the critical infrastructure has not been built out to support this. And so, you know, there's lots that we can talk about to go through, and I just wanted to you know, recognize that there are so many organizations that are doing this work, from, you know, the city schools, which we're going to get to hear from, and the library system, you know, to a whole coalition. The Baltimore Digital Equity Coalition has just been a fantastic group of doers that have been coming together to say, this is going to take all of us doing our part in some way, form, or fashion. And any one of us trying to do and solve this problem in isolation is not going to be as effective. You know, I am a proponent that we do need a collective impact model and approach to solving this, which really relies on mutually reinforcing activities where different organizations have different roles that they can play, but we all need to be in coordination, and we need to have a shared agenda. We need to all be looking the same direction. And the last thing that we need is to sort of undermine or somehow undercut each other in that work. And so, you know, coalition and coalition building can only move at the speed of trust. And whatever we can do to build and connect with each other and develop that is going to be really important for the long-term solution sets that we are coming up with. Because while it has become recently incredibly and painfully apparent for many people about this issue. For far too many, this is not a recent revelation. And this is not something that was only caused recently. But what can we do in this moment to have long-term impact and long-term change? You know, and I do appreciate, Brooke, your sort of reference to electricity. And if you think back to the Great Depression, was a moment in time in which a tremendous investment was made to say we need electricity getting to everybody, and that we are all better off if that is further and more widely available. I think the same thing can be said now and needs to be said now about access to internet, and the free flow of information and knowledge sharing is vitally important. It's insufficient, right? We need to do more. There's more things that need to be done, but it is a portal through which you connect to so many other resources and opportunities, that if you don't have, the digital divide gets wider, you know, and it's been getting wider. And I just think about, you know, whether it's youth in our summer youth employment programs, you know, that like working in a new environment, in a teleworking environment, or whether it's students studying, you know, and what the school system, I'm excited to hear some you know, from Chief High covered about some of the work that they're doing right now and recently, but being able to be supportive of each other in this work, you know, is of critical importance. So I'll pause there, and I'd love to hear the other panelists and then speak to any questions, but thank you for organizing this briefing where we can talk about the importance of this issue.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was great. Thanks for starting it off. That's really important data for everybody to see and have. You know, it's interesting. This is interestingly timed. Tomorrow, actually, at the Board of Public Works, they'll be voting on contracts to expand rural broadband in some of the Eastern Shore and I think Baltimore County, some areas too. So I think it's really important to have this data to demonstrate the need here as well. So really delighted next to have Heidi Daniel join us. So she is, if you don't know, you should, the CEO of the Enoch Pratt Free Library. And she is focused on leading the Pratt into the future by breaking down barriers of access for the people of Baltimore and the state of Maryland. In 2018, she led the Pratt to become one of the first fine-free public library systems on the East Coast. And thank you very much, because we have some books upstairs that we got out before the pandemic and we have not returned them yet. And I'm sorry about that. But Heidi, I'm delighted to turn it over to you to talk to us a little bit about your ideas and thoughts on how the library system fits into this space. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Brooke. Can you hear and see me okay? Is it all coming through okay?
Yeah.
Good, great, all right. So I just wanna thank Andrew for really framing the issue with some really good data up front. So I'll focus on the role that libraries have played, not just the Pratt, but all libraries really across the country in the state of Maryland, because we're all engaged in really similar work. So when computers first showed up on the scene, Gates Foundation started giving public libraries grants to put computers in them, and everyone sort of freaked out a little bit at the time and was like, what are we going to do with all of these computers? Are they going to replace books? Is the library going to go away? Once the internet showed up, would we no longer need public libraries? And you know, public libraries, being the institutions they are, quickly pivoted and have been focused for at least 20 some years now on sort of providing access to hardware, training, and in recent years, as Andrew said, we have not been sort of unaware of the digital divide. We've been keenly aware of it because it's one of the huge roles that public libraries play in bridging that digital divide across all communities, whether they unique challenges, because what the digital divide does is bring to surface all of the deep systemic inequities that already exist in our communities. So you look at the data that Andrew is showing you, you can see which communities are being impacted. And the library has always serviced those communities in really specific physical ways. So we have computers in our buildings, we open our buildings, we focus on access, and we focus on equity. So it's the reason why we remove fines, so nobody has barriers to accessing information, because we realized when the fines were impacting very specific communities, and those are also communities we wanted to service. And we were going against our own mission. And there was also a case to be made, a business case for that. But So we also have Wi-Fi in those locations, and we also have our mobile job center, which goes out to neighborhoods with 50% or higher unemployment rates, and that has all computers and internet on it, so people can come on board, apply for jobs, we can walk them through interviewing or applying for unemployment, whatever their need may be. Of course, when your physical doors close, it changes the whole conversation, and we were suddenly left with, how do we keep doing the work that we're currently doing, but we don't have the buildings to support it, and the hardware can't be easily removed from our buildings and deployed into the communities. So what can we do? So the library, first of all, we looked at our digital resources. We immediately contacted the school system to see how we could support online learning. And as a result, we purchased several new resources pretty quickly. Tumble Books is read aloud for preschool and pre-readers. Tumble Books for teens, which has curriculum-based ebooks. We upped our tutoring services so kids can connect to online tutors. We connected with Job Now, which is the same thing. You connect with a live career coach, and they can walk you through, interviewing and workforce development, and applying for specific jobs or working on your resume. Of course, all of that's great, but if you don't have access to the internet or computer, you're still not accessing those additional resources we purchased. So we instantly started looking at how we could sort of address that. And we knew that there were a lot of organizations also working on this. So we joined, or we're a part of the Digital Equity Coalition. We actually have a position on staff called our Digital Equity Coordinator, and their name is Lo, and they participate in the Digital Equity Coalition and have been doing the work in the laundromats. They've been leading the Wash and Learn initiative that we have, where we put technology and training in laundromats in conjunction with Libraries Without Borders. So they joined the Digital Equity Coalition, and we started to try to connect to what other organizations are doing. But we also took 8 of our buildings, we left our Wi-Fi on everywhere so that people could access it. But the signal could be more or less strong depending on where you are. So right now you might go to Patterson's Park and stand on one side of the building and get a really great connection. At Forest Park, you might be able to stand on Garrison Boulevard and connect, but at other locations, you might get a very weak signal or no signal at all. So we chose 8 locations across the city, our Orleans branch, our Patterson Park branch, Brooklyn, Northwood, Herring Run, Waverly, and Edmondson Village, and we focused on expanding those signals. So all of those buildings are in the process of having their Wi-Fi signal expanded so that it reaches all the way around their building and into parking lots. So Edmondson Village, there's a parking lot across the street. So we're calling that sort of drive-in Wi-Fi. So we instantly started doing that. And then we also have ordered sort of super hotspots for our mobile units so that they can go to public places and public parks and park. And up to 60 devices can connect to those hotspots. So we'll be able to deploy those as soon as the stay-at-home order is lifted. Our mobile job center will start going out. And then the other thing that we did was take the 200 hotspots we were already buying and sort of repurpose those. And 100 of them are for teens camp. So we have this great makerspace at our central library that has 3D printers and an audio video recording studio, an editing booth. And we had all of these fabulous camps, from hackathons to robotics to music making, planned with several partners. Media Rhythm Institute, Wide Angle were partners who would come in, and we would be doing programs and camps with them. And now, of course, we can't do those. So we're trying to figure out how to do those virtually, and we don't want teens to be limited by their lack of internet access. So we'll be deploying 100 of our hotspots or tablets out to them. And then we have 100 that we'll check out when we start our sidewalk service. So we're doing little things like that. And then we're also looking at sort of a larger partnership and questioning, we don't have any answers right now, but we're sort of questioning, how can we connect to efforts that are, the point to multi-point type or mesh networks across the city? How can we be assisting with device deployment throughout the city? We already have the ability to check things out in our system through our sort of library of things. We were purchasing everything from sewing machines to Chromebooks already to check out through those through some grant funding we had. So now we're saying, can we help? Do other organizations need help with device deployment? We could play a role there. So we're also very much saying to partners, hey, listen, if we can help out, we are happy to do so and sort of figure this out together. Because like Andrew said, it's not going to be any one of us that answers this call to action. It's going to be all of us doing it together.
That is true. That is absolutely true. Thank you so much for talking about the role of the library and all the things that you're doing, which is a lot. Thanks for that. Very interesting. It's hard to keep up with Pratt sometimes. There's just so much going on. It's exciting. Now I'm very happy to turn it over to Tina Hike-Hubbard. So Tina is the Chief Communications and Community Engagement Officer at Baltimore City Public Schools. And I think I first knew her as a board member of Baltimore City Public Schools and when she worked at Enterprise. So I'm delighted to have her join us today to talk about what Baltimore City Public Schools is doing. Of course, many people on this call and listening probably have kids in public school. I know my son is upstairs right now using an old computer that we have now resuscitated to connect to do his Google Classrooms as a first grader. Of course, I usually am there pushing the buttons or on and off and using the mouse for him. He hasn't figured it out yet, but this is such an important component of closing the digital divide is how can our school system be involved? What is the focus of the school system on this issue? I know they are laser focused on it because it's a huge issue. They've done a lot of work around it. So Tina, I'll let you take it away and talk about all the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Brooke. I'd like to say also, I have a 4-year-old and a 10-year-old in my house who are also doing a quiz right now, on the computer, and my 4-year-old having to do some kind of thing. So it's real, and I always ask for a little grace as I present because who knows what kind of interruption we could get from them. They love to pop in.
Yes,
no,
it's a standard now. It just happens.
That's right. That's right.
And we're all humans. We're very real.
That's right. So thank you for having us today. I'm happy to talk about what the district is doing around devices and around internet. I want to start out by saying we identified 3 priorities in the beginning of the closure process, right? Food was obviously number 1. And then getting devices in the hands of kids was number 2, and then internet. Once you have the device, how do you get online, be able to access to online learning? And mixed in with that is also distance learning, which is happening in a couple of different ways, obviously through the internet and through our online platforms, but also our television channels, Channel 77, Charm TV, as well as packets at our meal sites. We have 18 meal sites around the city, and kids can also pick up a packet if they're not able to get online. So all of that is distance learning. We do know that 85% of our kids so far have accessed distance learning, but more or less have gone online doing their instruction. So we are working diligently to sort of solve that problem. I'll talk about devices for a moment and then go into internet and then collaborations. So for devices, in the beginning, we ordered about 12,200 computers that we could hand out to kids. Chromebooks are our preferred device simply because we can manage them and jump in and provide tech assistance to our students when needed. We also created a tech hotline for families who needed help with getting on Classroom, Blackboard, Collaborate, that kind of thing. But we got 12,200 devices. And then with this money came from the city, we actually purchased another 3,500 devices that we added to our portfolio. So far, we have given out 11,000 devices. We did a round 1 of distribution. We are starting round 2 today. We estimate that we think the additional number of devices we need to give out is around 9,000. And we are still iterating. We did a food and tech survey in the very beginning of this. It stayed open, honestly, until last Sunday. And in that, we had about 48,000 students identified through that survey. So what we know is that the ones who did not respond, although some of them could have been because they have a device and didn't think they needed to reply, many of them are because they didn't have a way to respond to the survey. We also did phone calls and we tried to reach out. So now we're relying on information from schools and principals, community schools coordinators, et cetera, to let us know which families need a device. We also, in our first round, only gave out 1 device per household because we wanted to make sure we could stretch it out along the way. And now we are giving out devices to more children in a family to make sure they all have access to online learning as well. So that's been a Herculean effort in of itself to get all those out and socially distance and be at schools and plan them. And folks are like, can you publicly let us know when it's happening? And for the safety and protection of our kids and our staff, we really have appointments where we call folks and ask them to come in and get their devices. So it's been worked really well, but we feel we have another round we have to go and may have to do one after that once we really know what the delta is between what we think we know is the 9,000 and it could be a little bit more. So that's that piece. But for internet, this has been the biggest struggle for us. It's creating a real braided strategy around internet access. And I love the framing remarks and Andrew's remarks, and even Heidi's remarks about the fact that we are trying to figure out a public utility problem as a school system. And it is a big challenge. We are doing our best, and I'm very proud of the progress we've made so far. But really, internet needs to be a public utility where families have access to it at real time, not only just for information, but the impact of our communities for health-wise, academics, workforce, it's tremendous. And so what we're doing right now is just getting what we can do in the short term. So the first thing we did was reach out to Comcast Internet Essentials, which have been a fantastic partner in reducing the barriers to family access that were originally there around having a back bill or the proper identification. They've been a fantastic partner in helping us. And I can't promote the number yet because we're working on the final, but we've had thousands of families who've been able to get online because of that program. And we're so thankful for that process. We now need to think about extension of that 2-month time period, because if folks got on the beginning of our time period of closure, we're close to the end of their free 2 months. And so if families can't pay that $10 a month, we are concerned. So we're working through with Comcast, what that looks like for a district supported extension of that time period. What can Comcast do? So that's our first line of defense. The second is obviously with Digi More and Andrew's work at Digital Harbor Foundation is getting the mesh networks up. And we're super excited about, we have a proof of concept pilot right now that was funded by the Able Foundation, where we're out going to 4 schools. It's Baybrook, John Rura, James McHenry, and Lakeland, and thinking about putting the mesh networks on the schools to blast out the signal out into the community. And of course, it requires a community infrastructure and modems as well in homes. But we want to see how many kids now are connected that were not connected before, and then how many new kids are accessing online learning. And if we understand that proof of concept to be really fruitful, we then want to expand that mesh network strategy across the city into other schools and other areas identified by need. So we're really hoping that's a promising strategy. We're excited to have that partnership with them, and we're moving forward with that. The other way we're doing this is obviously through hotspots. We're trying to figure out what it is we need to purchase, how do we do it, who do we go through? And if you think about like a braided strategy, I was meeting with folks in Cherry Hill yesterday, and we talked about the fact that in places where Comcast doesn't go everywhere, like we actually thought it did, but it actually doesn't, right? And so we need to, we talked about doing a geo mapping of understanding where Comcast is actually available as an infrastructure, where the mesh network, if we do one there, will reach out into the broader community and what that will cover. And then where that delta of where those two things don't meet certain families, that's what we think about when we do hotspots and getting hotspots out to those families. So again, we're really working on the braided strategy. We're super excited about the promise of the mesh networks, but also knowing we have to have different components to make this work. I will say in the beginning, we thought about the district being, before closure, we talked about, should we have a one-to-one strategy, knowing that we don't actually have the resources to provide a computer for every single child in our district, but knowing that and then the research is mixed about younger children being on all the time and that kind of thing. So we are now sort of rethinking what it means to be a one-to-one district. And then with our recovery planning, we know that summer's going to look different. We know the fall could be all closed. It could be a hybrid approach where we have a mix of kids coming in and kids not, or we could be all in person again and have to close again. And so we want to be set up for success so that we know that kids have what they need right now, so that when we go into that next phase of this work, that we'll be able to sort of jump right into whatever new iteration it has to be. So our recovery planning is not just about technology, but about how we do instruction differently. And so we're in the middle of doing that right now, and hopefully we'll be able to put out something publicly by the end of the summer to sort of let folks know what we expect to happen or how we're going to iterate. But it's been, it's a significant challenge. And I will just say before I end that I'm very thankful for the partners we've had. I've talked to Heidi, I've talked to Andrew multiple times. The partners we have at the table have been incredible and trying to help us strategize how they can help. I've been presenting to the Digital Equity Coalition regularly. But again, it's about alignment and also understanding what each group can do. So for example, we have partners giving computers out to schools. I need kids. I need to know who those kids are so we can keep a track of who has them and who doesn't, right? Partners trying to get, we wouldn't have mesh networks if it wasn't for Andrew's group. Heidi talked about the idea of hotspots across the city. So I just appreciate the collegiality and partnership that we have with all these folks and many others to try to address this issue, a citywide issue for all of our families.
Yeah. That's great. You guys are, City Schools is doing a lot of work, and I'm so appreciative of the speed at which you're working too, because, every day really counts at this point.
That's right.
We've got to make sure that we're ready the fall, whatever it may be. There was one quick question that I'll just send your way before I move over to Karen. Will the devices you mentioned be collected before the summer, or will they be able to be used by students in summer programs?
Yeah, so the only devices we're going to collect are devices from seniors. We prioritize in our first round distribution juniors and seniors first. So the ones that are graduating, we will collect their devices because they are loaner devices. All of them are. But the ones who are given out, they can use them for youth works over the summertime. They can use it for summer activities. So we are not collecting them. But let's all recognize that we pulled devices out of schools as well. And if schools are open partially in the fall or fully, we also need to get our devices back in school. So over the summer months, kids will be able to keep them. And then once we know what the recovery plan looks like, we'll make a determination about how many actually need to be physically in school and how many can go back out.
That's great. That's helpful to know. Thank you. And now I'm so pleased to turn it over to Karen York to bring us to the older people. These are our little people that we're educating, but there's also this huge issue of digital equity and the digital divide with working people and adults throughout the city and state. And Karen York is CEO of the Job Opportunities Task Force, an independent statewide nonprofit organization that promotes policies and programs to help low-wage workers advance to high-wage jobs. And, you know, I think I don't know how you can do that without access to the internet. So it's certainly a fundamental component of working in America today. And so I'm really pleased to have Karen here to share her perspective and what she's seeing out there on this issue. Thanks, Karen.
Thanks so much, Brooke. Can everyone hear me? Thumbs up? All good? Okay, great. So, you know, just as Brooke mentioned, that, you know, the so-called digital divide is not specific to just urban and suburban areas. We find that it's a challenge in rural areas as well. The digital divide isn't specific to just school-age children, those individuals that are matriculating through the K-12 system. Earlier this year, the Baltimore Metropolitan Council released a report that included a survey of key employment barriers that workers in the Baltimore metropolitan region were facing. One of the top 5 barriers was internet access and navigating online applications. I bring that up to underscore how the digital divide was an issue prior to the pandemic, and it has just become even more pronounced during. And if we do not work together to ensure that our solutions are not short-sighted, that we are addressing both the short, mid, and long term, then the digital divide will continue to be even more pronounced, and we'll be having these conversations years to come. So our mission at the Job Opportunities Task Force is to help low-wage workers advance to high-wage jobs. That's our constituency, low-income, low-skill workers who are relegated to low-wage employment really due to barriers that are relegating them to opportunities that's really difficult for them to dig out of. You know, we know that the majority of job applications are online. They've been online for some time. And many of, particularly the panelists, and I know many of the individuals on the webinar are familiar with many of the challenges that constituents and residents and prospective employees were navigating and having to struggle through when it came to having to walk through these very complicated workforce systems and job applications and the like. And so now just imagine that you're still having to do that, but now you have a child who's at home. And you were already struggling through your adult digital divide, but now you are having to manage and support your child through their digital divide. And this comes with whatever challenges you may have, whether it's to the digital divide or to your own educational divide, where we also have to remember that now parents are having to be a lot more hands-on with not just having to figure out, you know, how do you use the computer, but we're hearing more and more about parents struggling through, you know, math and all of these subjects that we didn't have to do, like, you know, we don't remember, we did it back in like, you know, 2nd, 3rd grade, right? And so this divide is real, right? And so parents are struggling. You know, Andrew, thank you for mentioning the fact that it is not just specific to online learning. When things shut down, everything moved online. If you were seeking unemployment insurance, you had to apply online, regardless of the fact that the system crashed. That I think that's another webinar. But regardless of those challenges, individuals were still required to figure out how to navigate the system. I mean, I live in Highlands Market in Southwest Baltimore. And so by now it's known that the CEO of the Job Opportunities Task Force lives in Highlands Market. And so I cannot tell you how many times I'm coming from the grocery store, or I'm, just walking my dog, and I have individuals that are like, I tried to sign online and it went blue, and this happened and I don't know what to do, or what happens when I worked back then, and, time has passed, and now, I worked for a couple of months, but then, COVID hit. How do I navigate all of this? And, I'm having to explain that I'm not tech support. And, I'm also trying to, connect with the Maryland Department of Labor and others to ensure, that workers and others are able to get access to this information as quickly as possible. And this is someone who's the CEO of the Job Opportunities Task Force, okay? So just imagine those individuals who don't have access to the resources and supports that we do as an organization, what they have to struggle through. SNAP benefits, okay? You're already, you're already under pressure and struggling with the fact that you are trying to figure out how you're going to feed yourself and your family. And now you have to figure out how to navigate an online system and all the challenges that come with that. The workers who were relying on Wi-Fi and internet access when they were at work, they didn't have to pay for, now they're home, right? And so in many of the executive director support groups that I'm in, I'm hearing other executive directors and other business owners that are now exploring, is there an opportunity to provide maybe a credit, or, maybe cover the cost of Wi-Fi for their workers while they're home. And this doesn't even speak to the dead spots that Tina touched on. I think that is something that before we even talk about, any low income hotspots, that, low income, $10 can seem low income, but if you ain't got it, you ain't got it. And so before we talk about any low income opportunities, we really have to talk about the fact that there are whole communities that are dead spots. And my community is one of them. There are parts of Highlands Market where, 2 years ago, I wanted to have an all-night community resource clinic outside. And we wanted to be able to, have lawyers to do expungements and all of these things. But we realized that it was a dead community. There was no Comcast, there was no Verizon, there was nothing. So we had to have external folks come in and outfit this whole parking lot. Shout out to Empower and their young folks for coming through and hooking that up. But just the dead spots, the whole communities that are dead spots where access, regardless of a hotspot, is just wholly inaccessible. And then moving forward, as we start to look towards states reopening and businesses reopening, we're also hearing that training programs and different, job spaces are moving to online remote opportunities. And so we can't just, when we talk about solutions, we have to make sure that we're not just figuring out how do we provide, the short-term solutions, which are just as important, but we also have to make sure that for those workspaces that are now moving into a more long-term remote environment, how do we ensure that we are providing access to all in a way that's accessible and affordable, and that's not demoralizing, and it doesn't show that you're one of those that don't have access, so you have to, operate or do things differently that might cause you to stand out, and so it's, these are many of the solutions, they're policy solutions, and these policy solutions really include whether they're budgetary solutions, whether it's talking to, our major internet providers, and talking about how do we dismantle the monopolization of this service that's being delivered, and the intentionality of how it's being delivered, how affordable it is, and to whom, to ensure that something that was once a luxury, we've now realized is as important as gas and electric, should not be one of those things where if you live in certain communities, or if you are, if you have the luxury to still be able to have access to an employer that's going to support you in this manner, that you'll still be able to be safe. So I say all that to say, if we're talking about eliminating the digital divide, we will never, ever eliminate the digital divide if we're only talking about providing devices and internet access to those individuals within the K through 12 system. That digital divide isn't going anywhere.
Yeah. Nope, it's a well-made point. It's totally true. And I think that's absolutely accurate. There's a huge, the digital divide isn't just about school access. And I think in some ways prior to this pandemic, we would not have necessarily even thought of that as the first reason that we needed access. Now people are thinking about it so much more because kids aren't in school. But, you know, even before this, you know, applying for benefits, job applications, everything you said, turning in resumes, whatever it is, how to make a resume, right? So huge. Thank you. That was a great way to end this first part. So now I'm going to turn over. A lot of people, many people turned in questions and submitted questions when they RSVP'd. Many of those questions were answered in your initial presentation. So I'm really grateful. Thanks for reviewing them. A few questions, and not everybody needs to answer every question, but please just feel free to unmute yourselves so you can hop in and jump in and answer a question that you think is relevant to you. The first one that I'm going to go to is about 5G technology. And do you think this person asked, do you think that 5G technology can be used to close the broadband access divide? And if so, how? I don't know if Andrew, you have any thoughts on that. That might be a good one for you.
Yeah, no, absolutely happy to share. You know, and I really like how Chief Highcover put it, right? We need a braided strategy where it's all of the above. And, you know, if you look at data on some of the other platforms, whether it's, you know, 4G or LTE, 5G does outperform those, right? And it gets faster, better connections. So I've been looking at some LTE enabled Chromebooks for a specific application for a small subset of groups, and anticipating them doing teleworking through those is tough, right? It's limited. So, you know, to be able to provide that type of access point, doing the things that we expect the internet to be able to do would benefit from having 5G, you know, and so that's, again, I think a braided approach where we're doing all of the things and thinking long-term is important.
That's great. Somebody else asked, let's see, is there any movement around citywide broadband access and the fiber optic infrastructure needed to make this a reality? Are there institutions interested in funding this in partnership with Baltimore City? What is the role of the Digital Equity Alliance on these issues? Sorry, that might be for you again, Andrew.
Yeah, so there definitely is a series of conversations. I saw Liam Davis was on earlier and made a comment. He had to hop off, but he referenced some of the conduit that is owned. You know, Baltimore has a really unique asset in the amount of conduit that it owns, and there's been efforts to make sure that never is sold off. But the infrastructure that does exist here should be seen as an asset that we should continue to invest in and figure out ways to make that work with city schools. There's been efforts in the past that had some misalignments that didn't work for various reasons, but I think revisiting those and looking to say, like, what should we be doing now? How should we be structuring this? How should we make investments that are long-term in nature and are about bridging the digital divide? I think part of the problem that we're seeing currently in this moment, you know, is the relationship we have with some of the major providers was set up in a way in which you know, it has sort of one provider here. We don't have as much competition here as other communities do, and part of the reason for that was the justification of the cost of investing in communities, that the financial benefit wouldn't be there. And I think what we've seen is there hasn't been sufficient investment in those communities, you know, and we need to invest in those communities. And so I think whatever we're doing needs to have an equity lens, needs to be intentional about that. And the map that I showed earlier just shows all too clearly how the terrible legacy of redlining is still, like, with us. And so we definitely need to be, like, direct in confronting that and have a community-based approach to doing so, with building up organizations within communities to really have community-owned networks, right, that are taking the lead on this. So those are some of my initial thoughts, but happy to also hear other people's responses.
Anybody, any other thoughts on that before? Okay. Another question, there are a few questions about that relate, I think, to both the adult abilities and adult internet literacy and to school children. about, if you are an adult and you haven't had access to the internet, you probably haven't had the opportunity to learn how to, open the browser, go to Google Classrooms, make sure you're on the right one, open it, take a picture of whatever the work was done, upload it, send it in. It's complicated, right? And so I think, for Karen and Tina, it might be interesting that a couple of people asked sort of, what is the role of the school system versus nonprofits in helping parents and older people to become more internet literate, when a mom or a dad or any parent or guardian is able to be more internet literate, just like if they are reading literate, they're able to pass that on to their children. So how do we make that happen? That's sort of an added difficulty, but could you each talk a little bit about your thoughts on that issue?
Yeah, so when we first started our distance learning, we actually put some tutorials online for families. They could go to our website and simply watch them. But we also recognized that was a short-term solution. And if we're going to be in this for a longer haul, we need to do more. We need to have them in Spanish. We need to have them in English. We need to have a more breadth of options. And so we are actually proposing through our CARES Act right now, doing targeted training for families and frankly older students, right? It isn't just families. I struggle myself with uploading my son's homework. So let's be real. And I used to be a former classroom teacher, and I'm doing this work. So it's training for families online that will be developed and available over the summer and in the fall, which we're excited about providing. We just didn't have the time to do it a robust way in the start of this, but as we're moving and growing and learning where we need to add more or do more, that's one of our agenda items, is to make sure that happens.
And just to piggyback on Tina's comments, I think that, the answer to the question is that it doesn't fall on either or, right? It's a both. It should actually be a collaborative effort between nonprofits and the Baltimore City Public School System, because as we know, when it comes to adult education and when it comes to things like work-based learning, that actually usually falls outside of the K through 12 system. And so particularly for those individuals who are not technologically savvy, but are now having to increase their educational credentialing through technology. I mean, that's like a double, triple, like whatever, add some more numbers whammy, right? And so, and it can be demoralizing, it can be intimidating. And so how do we ensure that we are, partnering with systems that are very focused on, traditional educational opportunities and interventions, and coupling that, with nonprofits who are more geared to the non-traditional older adult. And I think also when we talk about, if we're talking about eliminating the digital divide for all, we also have to make sure that, we're talking about those folks that get caught in the middle between, the youth and the adults, right? And those are the individuals who are not in the K through 12 system, but they're not completely in the adult system, but yet they are working in some way, shape, or form, and they are still having to obtain some type of educational credentialing because that is what they need in order to continue staying engaged in the workforce, especially if they are responsible for sisters and brothers and children and the like.
Right.
So can I piggyback on that also? So, the PRAD is an institution that focuses on all ages. So we're not particularly focused on just serving children or seniors, where the whole spectrum is who we work with. And I think on a daily basis, when we are open, we have really an hourly basis, we have folks coming in who need to apply for a job and don't know how to work a mouse, who need to be able to fill out a form to get, as Karen has touched on really well, they need to get their SNAP benefits, they need to get a different kind of assistance, and they're trying to fill out their forms with really limited technology skills. So when we're open, we have a wide range of classes, whether it's Excel or introduction to the keyboard. We have them broken down, some of them by age group, but a lot of them are just general attendance. And since we've gone virtual, we are trying to do that online as well. It's a little bit more difficult. You can also call our hotline, our number. We have a reference number you can call, and you can leave your question there, and one of our librarians will call you back. So we have some really tech-savvy individuals who teach our computer classes and who do this work on a daily basis when we're open. So folks can call that line, and we'll have someone with technical skills call them back and walk them through the process. We also have an email specifically for unemployment, career assistance, job assistance, where someone will email them back or call them back or chat with them. We have an online chat service that we can help with. And then we also have tech talks online on our virtual programs as well. So, the library has been, again, providing this since computers came on board, because very frequently I have people come up to me and say, I really don't understand why we need public libraries, because everybody has everything they need right here on their phone or right here on their device, forgetting that people don't have devices, people don't have the internet. Even if people have internet and devices, they don't know how to use them necessarily, or don't know how to connect to things that a lot of us may take for granted. So right now there's a huge push for things like teledoc, but how do you do that if you don't even know how to do it? A lot of people don't know how to connect in that way. So we've been, working in this space for quite a while, because it's very much, not only is this something that could be looked at as a public utility, it's really digital equity as a whole, which takes into consideration the way people use devices, how they learn around devices. It's really a civil issue and a human rights issue that needs to be looked at sort of like holistically. And so I also just want to encourage people to look at all of the online resources and call the number or email us if they need help with chat as well. Our staff is happy to help.
Thank you. Yeah.
One other thought just to add, just as all of you were talking about those different issues, one of the underlying things that I feel like we need to address is how do we formally support informal learning? Because if you imagine your tech knowledge stopped at the point of your formal education ending, that would be like horrendous.
Yeah.
Like none of us would be able to even be on this
Right.
call, right? So how do we informally continually learn? And what is the structure that we put in place to support adults doing that? As well as, how many things that young people learn when it comes to technology did they learn sort of by trying and doing in informal processes? And so, thinking through like, how do we formally support informal learning, I think is a really critical question that we ask. And one additional sort of group of folks that I would throw in the mix when it comes to that is the extension system, right? So like what Ford does and the extension, if you look back 110 years ago at this point, when the Smith-Lever Act created that, it was for an agricultural-based society to get the knowledge from the university system out to the farmers who needed that knowledge in practice. I think we have a similar analogous situation where we have all this tech knowledge that we need to get out to everyday people to navigate the world that we live in. And so how do we formally support informal systems? How do we support processes like that, as Chief Highcover said, the school system currently is figuring out how to be the internet service provider too, on top of food distribution service, like everything.
Right.
How do we support each other as a coalition? Because, we're asking so much and they're delivering, but I think we should be passing current too, right? Like that's, and not.
Yes, we should be overriding vetoes. Yes, agreed. I mean, now that I'm teaching first grade, which is I'm not teaching, I'm opening up web browsers, and, I feel even stronger that our teachers deserve a raise. So, just, I don't want to go too long. I do want to recognize that we have Antoine Banks on with us, who works at, who is a Comcast person, government affairs director for Comcast. So thanks to him for listening, and also wanted to recognize we have on. Thank you so much. And also Chris Ryer, the Director of Planning for the city, because I know the planning department is really interested in these issues. So thanks to all of you for joining. I just want to close it out and with some final comments. And I thought a good way to have some final comments from everybody is to talk about sort of next steps, right? Like, what are the recommendations? What's the ideal? I saw somebody ask this in the chat box. This year, the General Assembly, we passed HB 999, which was a bill from President Pro Tem Cherie Sample Hughes, the Rural Broadband for the Eastern Shore Act of 2020. There are a bunch of questions that were submitted about, shouldn't internet access just be a public good? Should we just regulate it in a different way? I think that it's an interesting idea, and I think that it's something we have to look at seriously. But I also think, one of the things that we did with the rural broadband bill, which will be interesting to see, is that we allowed for an electric cooperative to operate as a member-regulated cooperative to work towards providing digital access on the Eastern Shore. So this was just rural, There is also now at the governor's office an office of rural broadband and rural internet access. So this is certainly an issue that I think many people around the state are talking about and interested in, and we have to really bring that home and see what we can do at a city level in Baltimore City, but then also what we can do at a state level to support increasing access. So I'd love to have you all each say a final word, and Abigail, I'm gonna steal from your question. Could you talk about what the ultimate optimal situation for universal internet connectivity would look like and the big decisions that would get us there? Would this be universal Wi-Fi, a blanketing mesh, universal broadband, or to use Tina's words, would we be braiding all of these different things together? And what will look different structurally when we succeed? I'll note that in the ABLE Foundation report, their recommendations included developing a pipeline of device delivery to low-income households, prioritizing families with school-age children, enhancing the capability of community anchor institutions like libraries and neighborhood nonprofits to provide tech support and skills training, enlisting stakeholders to address digital inequality, in e.g. like deeper engagement among the business and university communities, and building capacity in city government on digital access issues. So those were some of the recommendations from the ABLE Foundation report, but I'd love to hear your final sort of thoughts and recommendations and what the ultimate optimal situation would look like. So want to go in reverse order, and Karen, maybe start with you and then we'll go through backwards. Thanks.
Sure. So, you know, I think it's difficult to, you know, kind of list specific solutions because, I mean, you could, but I think we need to understand and remember that communities are not monolithic, just like people are not monolithic. And so we have to make sure that we're not approaching anything with, you know, a cookie cutter solution for all communities because communities are different even within the same zip code. And so, you know, how do we make sure that we're not doing anything to unilaterally or arbitrarily? But one thing that I do want to make sure that whatever we do, and I do agree with Tina that it's kind of a breeding of a number of things to address, you know, short, mid, and long, is that whatever we do, we should come out of this understanding that internet access should be accessible and affordable for all. It shouldn't, there shouldn't have to be, you know, special access if you are, you know, on SNAP or SSI or receiving any special benefits, because what if I'm a low wage worker and I don't qualify for any of those benefits because I make too much money? And so, and that's a thing for many of these workers, they don't qualify for that. And so they are SOL. And so how do we, if we're in this space now, how do we approach whatever solution with the idea that internet access must be accessible and affordable for all?
Thank you. That was great. Thanks. Tina?
Yep. So I was going to say braided strategy. So Karen, I'm glad you said that. I was going to repeat that part again. I don't think it's a one type solution, but I will say I would love to see a municipal Wi-Fi strategy, one that has equity access to internet for all. And I'm not a tech expert. I am a partnership expert. I'm a family engagement expert, but I've had to jump in this tech space of internet. And so I just know what's real for us. The district is already not having enough resources we need to fully educate our kids the way we are doing. So we can't pay for internet long-term for families, but we need to have a citywide approach to municipal Wi-Fi. But in the short term, it is that braided strategy of, you know, the Comcast internet, the mesh networks, and our hotspots, making sure we get kids what they need right now, or we work toward a larger term strategy.
Okay. Thank you. Heidi.
Yeah, so I agree with all of the things that Karen and Tina have said, and short term, it is a braided strategy. I think long term, we have to absolutely have universal broadband access for every household, rural, suburban. Maybe it's not broadband in some of the rural areas if it's not possible, but everyone should have internet access, a device access, and training access, which is really key because otherwise the other two pieces are fairly meaningless. And it's an equity issue. It overwhelmingly impacts low-income people, people of color, and all of the inequities we see come to the surface around this. And so for me, I've been looking at this for 20 years. I don't have an answer, or else I, probably would have solved it by now because it's really complicated and I'm not a tech expert, but it is those partnerships and bringing it all together and making people see that the internet is not just, and devices is not just a fun thing that we get to have. It is essential to the success of every person, school children, job seekers, seniors, and it is a critical infrastructure piece that needs to be solved.
Yeah, thank you. Andrew, let you close it out.
Yeah, so there's two things that I'll highlight that kind of hopefully wrap up a couple of what people are saying. One is when we're talking about this, I really think there's two networks that are absolutely essential in this mix. One is the physical technological infrastructure, the network that connects people to the internet, to the online resources. The other is the human network, right? We need a set of folks that can help each other through all of this process, and whether those are like what they call in Detroit digital stewards, or whether they're some sort of school-based sort of digital access, equity coordinator, whatever those systems are, we need a human network and we need a technological network. And the way that we're going to get there, the way that we're going to accomplish this, I think what we just saw happen recently here in Baltimore City with the Children Youth Fund committing, $9 million to addressing critical need of food and internet access and device access, and $3 million of that going to city schools to help support that Chief High Cover referenced earlier. I think that describes a little bit of how we get there, right? Which is all city council members came together unanimously to support that process, and city council president, and the mayor, came together with council member Zeke Cohen and collaboratively got that done. It's going to take that type of work of how do we work together? How do we, especially right now in this election season, how do we sort of put some of those things aside and really just get this work done is what it's going to take to build out those two networks.
That's great. This was wonderful. Thank you so much, all of you, for bringing your thought and your time to this issue, and to all of the people on the call today or in our meeting today, as well as on Facebook. So thanks. I'm already getting emails saying, thank you, that was so interesting. So I really do think this is important so that more people understand where we are, why it's so important that we address these issues going forward, and so that there's the political will to get things done. So just always like to close these out with a moment of gratitude for all the people on the front lines doing important work. Thank you to the school system. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Heidi and Andrew, for all of your work during this really challenging time. And thanks to our grocery workers, our farm workers, our transit drivers, our state personnel who are doing really hard work right now to take care of our communities and all of us. Thanks, Chad's got a heart going. I love it. Yeah. So thanks to all of you for all you do. I'm gonna just share everybody's contact information briefly. And thank you. Please, everybody, stay safe, stay healthy, be well, and keep in touch. So thanks so much. Take care. Bye.